Alrighty then. Another Sunday, another podcast. This one's a very special episode as we have our first guest of the new year with us. Mr. Martin Keller is with us tonight, and I will give you guys a short synopsis of his book here momentarily. But so that's the big ticket item on the docket tonight is going to be that interview, and it's going to be super sick. But yeah, among other things, we have we have the train derailments that have been happening recently, which is very sus and very sketchy. I don't know what's going on with that and why we haven't heard anything about it. And then we're gonna dive right into our interview with Martin Keller, which is gonna be super sick. So let's see, let me get it on here. So Martin Keller is he's a published author. He's got a book out. It is called actually put the splash on the screen right now. So this is our guest tonight. So you have Martin Keller over here, kind of by Alex. This is our guest. His book is called The Space Pen Club. Let me see if I can find a brief synopsis. All right, so here we go. So it's not just another UFO book. Rather, it is a rarity among thousands of books and other media, given the author's voice, experiences, insights, and insider status. The title stems from the writer's camaraderie with college classmates that comprise the Space Pen Club, a mostly tie-dyed collection of self-made merry pranksters who capriciously turned the Fisher Pen Company's advanced line of space pens, the first pen to write in space, into a symbolic icon representing self-exploration, cosmic consciousness, and communication, transcendence, and the occasional quest for beard girls, tunage, and controlled substances. So we're in for a ride tonight. Written in the colorful, engaging style that characterized the author's previous writing about popular culture and informed sensibility that underscores his ongoing work in public relations and marketing communications today, the Space Pen Club boldly challenges the writers and the readers' idea of linear reality while trying to define, understand, and make contact with what he humorously calls the boys upstairs, without tripping over the many agendas, complexities, and other earthly barriers that stand in the way. Compared to best-selling and other titles in this genre, the book stands on its own as a story within several stories about the pursuit of knowledge into what the phenomena might be, the attempts to make contact, the efforts to bring public disclosure for it, and the lasting impact it had on one man's life. So that's what we have to look forward to tonight with our interview with Martin Keller. So we're very excited for that. But without further ado, we're gonna do a little bit of scuffness here, and we're gonna welcome Martin in, and we're gonna get
boy, am I excited!
Yeah, we're gonna open up. We're gonna start talking about some of these train derailments and some other stuff going on. See what's going on. So, everybody, welcome Mr. Martin Keller to the podcast. And I think we just lost him.
And you kicked him out.
Nope, he kicked himself out because he clicked the wrong. Martin, you there? Worst case scenario is we'll just switch down to the other room.
I can see him in the room.
Yeah, he's just gonna do the same thing you did. And just click on the word live over there at the top on the top left there, Martin. It should put you in here. At least where we can hear you.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
We were just in a room talking to Martin, so we know this works. It's supposed to work anyway.
I know. Made this, I thought it was going to be easier just having our own final server where we could have ease of access for sending links out to our guests, but got some growing pains. Oh, he's trying to get the camera working. It's okay.
Perfect.
Let's see what happens. Make sure your settings are set to non-admin at the top. Ooh, good call.
Oh, he emailed and said, don't know where you guys went.
Good call, Timothy. Hold on 1 second. Server settings. Let me just do this real fast. Oh God. It's not in server settings. It's going to be in the settings here. Permissions, everyone. Your channel, manage channel.
Make sure you
speak, connect. And video. All right, it should work now. I think I had to change the settings. I didn't even realize.
Okay, hopefully it works now. Fingers crossed.
All right, well, change some settings, so hopefully that works. True. I know, I had to turn it off. I didn't want to go through all those settings with it on the screen. Hopefully it should work. Alex emailed him.
If we go back to green room, is that?
We can give it a whirl if it's not going to work here. I think I got the settings changed, but we'll just jump back down there. That way we know that one works. Come on. Oh, there we go. Oh, fuck it. All right, well, my plan failed, but we're here. We can hear Martin again. I got some more tweaking to do. Yes, sir. Sorry about that. I thought I had the settings all right. We got some more tweaking to do, but that's okay. Figure that out next time. But anyways, yep. So, we got your welcome in. Unfortunately, Alex done clicked the wrong button and left us again. There we go. Come back, Alex. Click on the green room, Alex.
Yep.
There you go.
Yep.
He's figured it out.
I'm working on it. Okay. There we
go. All right. So I think tonight what we're gonna do is we're gonna start off talking about the train derailments. 2 that we know of that have happened over the past couple of weeks. And just kind of. Just gonna see what your thoughts are on it, there, Mr. Keller, and we'll go from there because I think it's very suspicious that we haven't heard hardly anything about it in the news, and that they're literally just
derailments.
Yeah,
I thought we were gonna talk about UFOs.
Well, we'll get there. We're gonna get there. So,
And that's if you have any opinions on
If you don't have any
train
opinions on it, then we'll
derailments.
just bounce and we'll just go right into UFOs. But but yeah, I don't know. I think it's very suspicious we haven't heard anything about it in the news. I think, and this is where some of the UFO stuff comes in, that all of the unidentified objects that were shot down recently might have been a big distraction from what was actually happening with those. Because the government hasn't done
Well,
anything to help with that whole situation. Like they're literally burning tons of toxic chemicals in
I've
Ohio.
I've read quite a few news stories about it, so I think it's a little disingenuous to say there's nothing being reported on it.
Perhaps I don't know. I haven't really seen much coverage of it in mainstream media, the big news networks.
There's been a fair amount of coverage. I think there's been a lot of coverage, especially if like you're on Twitter or whatever. But I do think it's, speaking of disingenuous, I think most recently what has been shot down and the speculation around what's been shot down as being UFOs. And Martin, tell me if you agree or disagree with this. Um, I think it's a little disingenuous and maybe bringing smut to the true intel or to the true UFO slash UAP phenomenon to say that what is being shot down could potentially be the true UFO in the sense from another planet or another galaxy. Martin, what do you think about that? Maybe the most recent shoot downs of these unidentified objects.
Well, I've been following the reporting on it pretty closely since I have always been interested in this subject since I was a kid, and uh, it's hard to know really what the objects were. Uh, I think pretty strongly if an ET craft of any sort, whether it was a drone or craft with occupants, if it were shot down, it would be a classified action. They wouldn't announce it. So that said, I think it's probably three incidents of rather benign objects in the sky. The only thing that interests me and is intriguing is that the one that was shot down in Alaska was reportedly interfering with the sensors on the plane that shot it down, and that's kind of a signature of a craft interfering with radar and missile launching activities. And but again, if it's some sort of intelligence, some spy apparatus in the sky from another country, I would think the more sophisticated ones would also have those jamming capabilities. And it was just announced today, I think, or late yesterday, that the search for those objects has now been suspended, which is going to raise more questions than provide answers. So people who are thinking, there's some kind of cover-up going on, it's going to feed right into that mindset. My jury is still out on it. I don't know what to make of it. I try to blog about these issues on the spacepenclub.com at least once a month, and I've been sort of withholding judgment and doing anything on that blog until I really can get what I think are the facts and to make an informed opinion about this. But again, there's a lot of speculation that it's hard to prove one way or the other. The only thing I will say is that, you know, when Roswell happened, the weather balloon story was floated, so to speak, no pun intended,
Right.
almost immediately, and that was the first of three stories that the government has put forth over, you know, how many decades has it been since Roswell? I mean,
Right. Like
which government uh, report are we supposed to believe? I mean, I tend to believe Jesse Marcel and his son that it was the real thing.
yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't see why it wasn't. And it's all very coincidental and very timely that we just shot down an alleged weather balloon from China, which, we all know that definitely wasn't a weather balloon. And then right after that, we have 2 to 3 more instances of unidentified objects in our airspace.
Martin, are you familiar with Jeremy Corbell whatsoever, and George Knapp, or
Sure.
either of
Yep.
those? Yeah.
Yep.
Their most recent podcast kind of gave me a new light on this. My brain, when I hear unidentified flying objects and jets being scrambled to identify them / potentially shoot them down, the conspiracy in my brain says, yes, this is it, it's really happening. Their take on it was very interesting in the sense that it reeked to them in a way that it was an attempt to sort of bring smut to the UAP community, in the sense that they were putting out these reports as radar was scrambled, and their systems were somewhat jammed up by these unidentified objects. Now, like you said, and the no visible proof of a propulsion system, all things that are almost verbatim from these true reports, from people like, Bob Lazar, who supposedly, I believe, is credible when he says reverse engineered systems at Los Alamos. Commander Fravor, speaking of zero propulsion systems in the Tic Tac video, that sort of thing. So it is interesting that these are the reports that we hear, are almost direct quotes from reports in the past. And if these reports are true and we are being told the truth, then yes, I think, like what you said, it's very interesting and potentially exciting. It's also very interesting, again, that they might be using this as a way to say, see, these are weather balloons all along, guys. We found the material, and these actually were balloons. And oh, and now we have evidence to suggest that balloons could potentially jam our radar systems. So it's, again, the skeptic in me with the conspiracy lover in me, and it's tough to know what to make of it. And I don't think we have very clear evidence right now. Clearly, we don't have clear evidence right now as to what it is, but it's intriguing, to say the least. So,
Yeah, I'm more interested, frankly, in the law that Biden signed into office late last year, as the year was closing, the Defense Authorization Act,
Mm-hmm.
which funds the military and the intel agencies. There's a huge clause in there, a whistleblower clause, that allows for any witnesses to these UAP, UFO programs to come forward without fear of prosecution. And I think that story has gone really underreported, and I don't know for whatever reason that is, but to me, that's a bigger and a better story than shooting down objects that apparently are some sort of weather balloons, or perhaps commercial or even private, you know, balloons launched by some clubs, the club out of, where is it, Illinois or Indiana, $12 balloon. I mean, let's
Yeah.
focus on more tangible things that have longer term implications. I mean, this news cycle, thankfully, is almost over, and I'm hoping that while it's been ongoing, that we're going to see a lot of witnesses begin reporting to the new office that's set up to investigate all this. The Arrow office, I've got to look at my notes, the All Anonymity Resolution Office, typical bureaucratic Washington bureaucracy speak.
Yeah.
And, Biden also just announced this week that the White House would set up its own channel to look at these. And now we have, not too many months ago, NASA announced it. So we've got all these arms of government looking at this issue, even though this issue has been looked at least since the 40s, if not before. So it's a little perplexing to square all, if we're in a true disclosure period, or if we're just having more of the sort of same mush that was served year after year after year.
Yeah. It is interesting. On the one hand, you could say that all of it is, just put together to kind of appease people after they've been asking for years and years and years about whether or not the government knows if UFOs, UAPs are real, if they've had contact, and then setting this up to kind of placate the masses, or if it is something that is actually tangible and real, and they're actually going to do something and share information. Again,
Well, if the government would look at its own records and its own history of their own generals talking about this, they would find that it's kind of a done deal. And I'm going to read from a 1947 classified memo that was declassified under a Freedom of Information Act, a FOIA request several years ago. It was written by General Nathan Twining in 47, and he said basically that they're not of this world 74 years ago, and that the phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. And he went on to describe, quote, extreme rates of climb and other characteristics that precisely match the recorded capabilities of the objects that were recently released in those naval footage, the so-called Tic Tac videos. So, there's Twining speaking on the record that these are real, and Americans are terrible at either denying their history, ignoring it, or reinventing it.
true.
Mostly ignoring it. So I'm hoping
Yeah.
these congressional folks, Rubio, Gillibrand from New York, people that put this into motion in the first place, are going to be passionate enough and smart enough to begin to examine the historical record at the military level and the intelligence levels, and to put that out into public discussion. Aside from just trying to look for new objects, I mean,
Yeah.
I think we have enough evidence and data to support that, it's a real thing. And now what do we do?
Amen.
Yeah. No, 100%. I agree with that. And, Commander Fravor is not a crazy person. I believe that he, saw what he saw while he was out there on those sorties. So,
Well, and you not only have Commander Fravor, but you know, he's probably the most, quote unquote famous,
Yeah,
especially,
recognized.
being on the Joe Rogan Experience. But there are many, many pilots from the Air Force, from all branches of the government who have been up there and have experienced these things and have had near miss encounters with these objects. I think, like Martin just said, there's plenty of evidence to suggest, which I think, especially last time I'll talk about the balloons, I just think it's so silly now that there's such, like an uproar, especially on social media about these balloons. Folks, there's been evidence, a lot better evidence than this, quite honestly. Yeah, the Mosul orb is one of the more recent ones. Above an airspace in Afghanistan or Iraq, somewhere in the Middle East.
I think it was Iraq.
Yeah. And the United States is just completely silent on it, and it again, it just speaks to me like you just said, Martin, there is plenty of evidence out there to suggest that what we're working with is not, made up. And yes, this specific topic tends to draw in, a lot of the crazies of the world for whatever reason, just like, the Bigfoot communities and the Loch Ness monster community, people group it all into that. But let's set all that aside and just look at the distinct evidence that we have. And I think that there's plenty there to suggest that not only is this a real thing that we're dealing with, but what do we do about it, and how do we open up these discussions? Could you speak to more about was it the Arrow program that you called it?
No, that's a new office that was set up.
Okay, and what's the specific function of that? I'm sorry, I kind of missed that. Could you touch on that again?
Investigate this whole phenomenon. I want to go back though and just say I think it was pilot Ryan Graves who now has his own podcast. I think he told 60 Minutes that his fellow pilots were seeing these objects like the Tic Tacs out over the Atlantic on a daily basis. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty startling admission. Now, those could be classified intelligence drones or some other technology that's not in the public domain yet that the pilots may not even be aware of. So I mean, there's so many layers to this. It gets tiring trying to peel that onion, but
Yeah.
the fact that the Pentagon had a secret study from 2010 to, I believe, 2007 to 2010 that was run by Lou Elizondo, who's sort of out of the UFO closet now, that made the front page of the New York Times in December of 2017, never once used the term conspiracy theorist or conspiracy. That was a huge watershed moment, and I think it's taken the blinders off a lot of people who are finally maybe realizing this is something we have to address. It's a commercial aircraft, potentially commercial aircraft endangerment. These things are flying around in our airspace without any sort of filed
Right. No flight plan.
air flight program, if you will.
Right.
So, I mean, there's just so much we could talk about, and I get into that in my book quite a bit. The last two chapters of the Space Pink Club are really about disclosure, and including the one disclosure effort I was involved in 1967 with Dr. Stephen Greer's organization, Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, otherwise known as CSETI. And we had some pretty reliable witnesses from the military at that event, and then Greer subsequently held his 2001 National Press Club disclosure event, which had numerous witnesses. I wasn't involved with the organization at that point, but I sure as hell followed what was being presented in Washington.
Yeah, Stephen Greer's as well as you are very respected member of this community, and
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. Greer is one of the most polarizing figures in the UFO community. And, people love to hate on him. Other people think he can do no wrong. And the truth is, he's an easy target. And, I met him in the early 90s, and I worked with him on a pro bono basis as his communications guy through the late 90s, and have followed his work obviously ever since, but I have not been in touch with him. He's very polarizing. He was something of a pariah even when he was just starting out. Just he said he was just getting off the ground in 1991 or so. But he's a brilliant man, and his intentions are good, and all this other garbage that's thrown at him, as well as all of the over the top
accolades.
praise. It's neither one of those serves the purpose of getting at the truth or at getting at a true disclosure moment. I mean, personally, I think we're not going to have real disclosure until these visitors present themselves in some formal fashion to world
Right.
governments. I mean, that's my take. I mean, you can talk disclosure all day long, but it has to be a bilateral disclosure.
Yeah, I don't feel that the government would ever 100% fully disclose whether they've had contact or anything that would potentially lead to either mass panic or making them look goofy.
Well, the biggest threat is to industry, to the
Mhm.
energy industry, oil, and obviously the technology these things possess would eliminate the need for oil,
Right.
eliminate the need for an electrical grid like the one we have now. I mean, the implications are pretty dramatic, and I get into that in my book and on my blog occasionally on the book's website, thespacepenclub.com. So, it's the kind of multifaceted issue that is hard to take in,
No,
and
it
there's
is
not a lot
indeed.
of critical thinking around it.
No. No, unfortunately not. Um, so you would say that I guess one of the layers of this onion would be that like big oil and oil companies are would be lobbying or pushing for the government to not disclose anything if they knew in order to keep their livelihood afloat.
Well, sure. I mean, the oil companies were finding out now for decades, went out of their way to uh, deny that fossil fuels were causing a climate crisis,
Mm-hmm.
even though their own studies proved it. Back in the
Yeah.
70s. All that stuff will be litigated now. It's going to take years, but
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
in
they hired the
Minnesota.
same lawyers that Big Tobacco did.
Well, big tobacco ended up paying a pretty big price, and I think a lot of people who are tired of the way the fossil fuel industry has behaved and endangered the planet and
Mm-hmm.
its environments. A lot of people would like to see them taken down.
Right.
well, and not only would those companies, obviously lobby for, if the government did have some sort of information about these propulsion systems, or just the energy systems as a whole, you start looking at things such as the stock market, the financial economy. I mean, there's a lot of ripples that this would send through, life as we know it just as a whole. And largely, I think for the better if we did have, access to this knowledge. But, that's up for speculation, I suppose.
Well, I think the knowledge is well covered under all the veils and layers of secrecy that our government and other governments have worldwide. I mean, this isn't just a phenomenon that's common to the United States. These things are spotted all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I mean, like we just spoke about the Mosul orb. I hope I'm saying that right. But yeah, this definitely isn't an anomaly that's just centralized in America. It's a global phenomenon.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
I do have a question. Speaking about secrecy and technology and members of the community, what's your take on Bob Lazar and his story and um, his whole encounter?
Well, that's a good question, and I wish I could give you a good answer, but I don't have one. I know that Bob Lazar's story has been around for quite a while. I know that a lot of people have debunked it in the UFO community, and I know a lot of people have upheld it in the UFO community. But, when people like Stanton Friedman, the late great Stanton Friedman from Canada, uh, does a little research and isn't able to find a paper trail back to Lazar's academic claims, I grow a little uneasy. I actually had a chance to meet him once in California, and I blew it off
No.
because
Man,
I was with Paul Krasner, the one of the original Yippies from the '60s, who is also the father of the underground press in America.
Mm.
And I was doing an interview with him for Rolling Stone magazine, and I ended up overstaying my time there. Paul was in Venice, and Lazar and the woman, his friend, who invited me to meet him, was several suburbs away, and it was rush hour. I just said, "The hell with it! I'm not going to make an attempt."
LA traffic will get you every time.
Yeah, well, I probably blew a good chance to, ask Bob my own questions about what he knew or didn't
Mm-hmm.
know. But again, there's another polarizing figure in what Steve Greer always famously called the UFO ghetto, which is a term that still cracks me up 20 some years later.
Yeah, that's it's a good name for it. Yeah, Bob Lazar, his story is it's so interesting. And it's equally as interesting that there's just no trail anywhere.
well,
Just everything just disappeared like he never existed.
if you ask him, and he's one of I've always been interested in this topic going back to when I was a child, and my mother has a strong interest in this topic as well, going back to some missing time she had when she was a child that she can't specifically, say, well, that's directly, I was abducted, but at the same time can't say, well, that was just a completely normal time in my life. There's a stretch of missing time where she was playing in the woods, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to get into that right now, but Lazar has always been so intriguing to me. Because his story has stayed so continuous throughout the entire time of him telling it, and the fact that he doesn't really like to talk about it, and according to him has never profited from his story as well, which are two things for me that it's just very intriguing, and I'm inclined to believe his story. Now, like you said, there's there's a lot of folks out there who would debunk or say that that what he's saying is just patently false. I'm inclined to believe what he has to say about the topic. It all kind of aligns and makes sense to me, but I also don't have a crystal ball to be able to say whether he's telling the truth or not. So very
Well,
very
there's
fascinating.
so many characters like Lazar, and there's so many ideas around this. There's so many memes and themes and um, different narratives. I'm an English major. I love a good story. I tell you, this story has so many tentacles. I wouldn't know where to start to get to the one that
That leads back to the monster.
that reveals that leads you to the real deal. And I don't know in my lifetime if I'm ever going to see that, but certainly right now we're at a place none of us thought we would be at 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago.
That's true. Yeah, I did not ever
But
foresee the government openly being like, yeah, we know about this and we've definitely had contact. Like, hold up, wait, what?
a little side note, Martin, my mother is currently listening right now, and she's very excited for this interview tonight. So she wanted. Yes, her story was she was playing in the woods as a child. She went out in the morning, came back what she believed, was an hour or so later for, lunchtime. And it was actually dinner time, and her mom was like, where have you been all day? And she had this mysterious cut on her leg. And it goes a lot deeper than that. I wouldn't do it a service by trying to tell it. She'd have to tell it sometime. But
there's a lot of stories like your mother's out there. I have a close friend who's also kind of a rock and roll star here in the Twin Cities, Curtis A., who's in the book several times. He has a really great so-called abduction story. I like to think of it as a close encounter of the fourth kind. And he's got the alleged cut in the shin, etc. Chapter 3 of the Space Pen Club is devoted almost exclusively to the abduction discussion, and if anything, I would obviously encourage people like your mother and you guys to read my book and then to start doing your own research. There's another book by a couple that was written about alleged military staged abductions, which would be part of the black world that surrounds this issue and the secrecy, sort of a prolonged psyop, if you will, where these things are fake abductions used to pollute the public discussion about the whole issue and to create a fear factor that will keep the military-industrial complex rolling in trillions of dollars annually in defense budgets around the world, everywhere, into the next century. So,
yeah, it would not surprise me if that plays a factor. Which, I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't. It probably did. They definitely. The government has been well known to fearmonger the populace into getting more money for defense spending. So, any excuse to keep that budget pumping.
That's a topic that's a topic for me for another day, because if I get riled up about that, that's all, yeah.
Yeah, anyway. We'll stop talking about UFOs, and Alex will start berating the government from Omaha, Nebraska about their defense military budget spending.
Is the Strategic Air Command in Omaha?
It sure is, off at Air Force Base.
Yeah.
The place is a dumpster fire of a base.
Oh, I just refereed basketball games with a gentleman who worked at Offutt Air Force Base for a long time in the command center, and Yeah. Anyway, that's there's a lot of stories about that.
I would imagine the senior and retired flag officers at that base probably know quite a bit about this, but will never be able to talk
Never
about
be
it.
able to
Although
say.
now, with this whistleblower protection in place, maybe some of them will come out of the closet and help burst this dam.
I'd be interested to hear their stories. I would indeed. I did put in to try and go to Offit as one of my next bases to go to, but unfortunately for my career field, that is all run by civilians over there, so there is no shot that I'll be going to Offit, Nebraska.
What else would you guys like to know?
I did have another question, especially surrounding abductions. And I apologize if this is in your book. I can assure you that I will be reading that after this discussion. But the Travis Walton story is another story that's always intrigued me. Thoughts, opinions on his story? True, not
Sorry.
true. What are your thoughts on the Travis Walton
Well,
story?
I'm kind of a fan of the Travis Walton story. I still haven't read his book, but I intend to at some point in the not too distant future. But I saw the movie. I think it's pretty compelling. The fact that the was it 4 or 5 friends that were with him when the event occurred, all passed their lie detector test. I mean, that's pretty good in my book. That scores some points. Walton
I'm
seems like a salt of the earth, down to earth kind of guy who obviously isn't gonna make millions of dollars off his story. Although I'm sure he made a little bit of money when he sold the rights to the book to be made into a film. But that said, that's one of the close encounter cases that I really think probably is the real thing, and it's got all the right elements. It's got witnesses. It's got law enforcement involvement, and it's got the terrifying tale that Travis presents.
I'm really glad to hear you say that because that's probably my favorite is maybe the word to use or most compelling case I think of an abduction story. The fact that his friends or coworkers, friends, whatever you want to call them, go back into town and say, "We saw a craft and our friend went towards it and it blasted him and we left and then we came back and he's gone." And then the sheriff says, "Okay, yeah, we're locking all of you guys up for murder." And then they go out with the scent dogs and they can't find hide nor hair of this guy for 5.5 days. And then all of a sudden he's back. You know, th- where would he have gone? I mean, it's
He
not like,
just disappeared into thin air.
I mean, there was a manhunt out there for this guy, so where was he? Well, and according to him, we know where he was, so it's a very intriguing, compelling, I think. The Betty and Barney Hill is another great one.
Yeah,
That
that's kind of the first so-called abduction story that actually made it into mainstream media back in the 60s. And just a side note on that story, the Obamas are going to produce a new film about that case,
No
which
way.
is interesting. I mean, I think it's pretty smart on their part because this topic has never been more in vogue than it is right now, and uh, it's a biracial couple. They obviously suffered some sort of traumatic after effects from this. I
Mm-hmm.
was in New York City one time, and this is in the book too, and I went to a presentation by Betty Hill's niece, Kathy Marsden, I think. I don't have my notes on her in front of me, but it was at a UFO organization meeting not too far off of Times Square, and Bud Hopkins was involved. Leslie Kean, who co-wrote the New York Times front page story in December 2017. She was there, and Betty's niece played some of the tapes from the hypnosis session, and they were very unsettling, I think is the word I want to use.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I think that'll be a good Netflix. I think it's either gonna be a series or a film.
Probably
And
be a docu-series, knowing Netflix.
couldn't have asked for better timing in terms of public interest in this.
True.
I
I-
just saw something on social media about them producing that, and I'm very excited for that, and I'd love to.
I'm very
I would have
interested
loved
about
to have
that
been there
now.
to hear those tapes because that's speaking of my mother again. She actually just commented and said I was afraid of my own shadow because of them. But yeah, it was intriguing, and I can't wait for that to come out either. Especially the whole interracial couple aspect of the story and how it was so polarizing, and
I wonder
And
if
then you have the Whitley Strieber communion story, which just about everybody in the UFO community is aware of by now. That was a book and film, and Strieber still talks about it, and it's apparent that this was a life-changing event for him too.
yeah.
that Betty and Barney, Travis Walton, and the two schools, one in Africa and the
the one-
other.
where was the other one? Was it?
I'm sure Martin knows. Was it all?
I think it was someplace in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, it was the one in
Yes.
Zimbabwe, and then there was another one where they abducted us. Like years later, they visited the kids at this other school, like continents away. I don't remember where it was.
There's a relatively new film about that
Yeah,
African school children. I forget what it's called, but I haven't watched it yet. I mean, I've followed that case since it was first reported in the media, and John Mack flew down there and interrogated all the kids and the school teachers, and it got a lot of interest, and I think there was some fairly solid research done on it. But another put it in the tinfoil file, as I call it in the book.
Yeah.
yeah,
And the message communicated to them, the fact that technology would be what would destroy our civilization, that to me just really brings it all home and gives me the shivers down the spine. Like, oh my gosh, this. I don't know what their MO is, or why the interest is here. But
because
it's
we
all
about killed ourselves in the 40s with nukes.
well, that's
Still have that potential. I mean,
Exactly.
Russia's been doing a lot of nuclear saber rattling ever since they rolled into Ukraine. That's a year old now, and
Yep. It's because they're getting their ass kicked over there.
Danny Sheehan, the public interest, public policy lawyer who was involved in the Pentagon paper release, and Karen Silkwood, Iran-Contra, so many really high-profile cases where the government is challenged on what it did to interfere in all these people's lives, and Sheehan has been interested in this subject for a long, long time, which I was shocked to find out. I met him at a Nevada UFO convention event one year, and I kind of recruited him for Steve Greer's organization when we were just starting our disclosure process because his thinking pretty much mirrored Greer's. He said the government's never going to come clean on this. Citizens need to do it themselves. We can build a big enough case for it, etc., etc. Well, in June of 2021, right before the government report dropped, the whole 9 pages of it, first report from this new office, Sheehan was on a podcast that I listen to occasionally from Canada, out of Winnipeg, Grant Cameron's podcast, and they were having a kind of a roundtable discussion, and the big question was, well, why is all of this disclosure talk and all this government activity with setting up offices and establishing new sensors on aircraft and so on, why is it happening now? As that discussion evolved that evening, I think Sheehan did a nice job of framing it. He said, when you look at the bona fide close encounter cases that can't be dismissed out of hand, that have reliable witnesses who interacted with ETs, the general message from them every time is, you need to get rid of your nuclear weapons because they're a threat not just to you and your planet, but they're a threat to us in space. And you need to take better care of your environment because it's collapsing. Well, that resonates pretty highly with me. And, the UN 2 years ago issued a code red with its annual report on climate crisis and the overheating of the planet. So, we're in kind of deep water these days, and if the ETs are surveilling us and warning certain individuals about, why they are and what we need to do, I think it's imperative that we stop and reconsider all the various nefarious things that go on in the world, and that we stop polluting the environment, we reduce significantly our use of fossil fuels, and we finally get rid of the nuclear stockpiles of all the superpowers. I mean, that would be a start, I think, to a sane, sustainable planetary existence.
Amen. I could not have said it any better myself, and I don't think it's an extreme coincidence that the number of reported UFO sightings and cases saw an extreme uptick post the first nuclear bomb being detonated.
Yeah,
I think
right.
I think the fact that those two coincide as well as they do leads, and along with all of the other evidence that we have, I think that there's a strong case to be made there that, whether it is some sort of, whether it will affect, space life or whatever you want to call it, or it's more of a humanitarian effort, if you want to call it that as well, to where they're watching the chimps on a rock saying, hey, we better get down there before these guys destroy themselves. Or it's, going to have impact on them as well. Whatever the case may be, I think that there's a strong connection there. And it's time that we wake up and we start taking better care of ourselves and the planet, or else we might find ourselves in water too deep to swim out of. So.
Yeah, well, we're almost there, I think. Chapter 4 in the Space Pen Club book revisits the incident in Minot, North Dakota, which is only 100 miles from where I grew up out in western Dakota, and at the Minot Air Force Base in 68 or 66. I always confuse the date, but I I repeat some of the information that a friend of mine here in Minneapolis has spent a couple of years compiling of what happened at the Air Force Base one night when an object came over the base, and it was witnessed by airmen on the ground and a team of airmen up in a plane returning from a normal, nightly run. And they had it on radar, they had visual lock on with it, and this thing scared the hell out of the people on the ground, and it also was able to move this 20-ton concrete block off of a missile silo and scramble the codes. It's a highly researched, well-written report. You can find it online. Just Google Minot Air Force Base incident, and the whole report's there. I excerpt some of it in my book in chapter 4, and then Robert Hastings has an entire book about incursions at other nuclear bases, including probably the most famous is Maelstrom in Montana.
Yeah.
And then Robert Salas, who is stationed at Maelstrom, has been making quite a bit of noise about these efforts and is trying to get the congressional folks that are driving these current new offices to research and investigate the phenomena. He's trying to make some inroads there with his own testimony and that of other military folks who witnessed some of these incidents. So again, kind of exciting times, but also very confusing. And when I wrote this book, I said a couple times in it, I said, this is my farewell to ufology, because I'm tired of it never going anywhere. And after this, I'm done. And yet here I am, a year and a half after the book was published. I'm still writing about it on my blog. There's a Facebook group you can join called the Space Pen Club. A lot of people post interesting stuff there, and I post my blog there when I write it, and other news stories that I think are of interest to that group. So, I've never been more involved in it, and I have other things I want to write. I'm kind of tired of the subject, but it won't leave me alone.
You're stuck with it, Martin. I don't think you're ever gonna get away from it.
I'm a member of the Space Pen Club on Facebook, I'd like to proudly say, and there is a lot of interesting things on there. And you've been doing this, so when you're dedicated to it, I'm just a fan of it, and a nighttime stalker of the internet webs trying to find stuff on this. But even I have a certain level of frustration of, anxiousness of, okay, well, when are we going to get something? When's the substantial stuff? When are the answers going to come? And it just doesn't seem like they have, or, the pessimistic side kicks in and says, well, will they ever? How do you keep going? What drives you? Is it just your interest in the subject, or do you feel like you have a like an obligation to the subject, or what keeps you going at the end of the day?
Well, I'm kind of a news junkie to begin with, so I read a lot of different news, offline and online, and I think we're not going to have any truly pronounced forward movement until wherever these visitors are, these unknowns, the ovnis, as the Mexican media calls them, which has been reporting on them for years. I mean, if you want to see UFOs, go to the volcano zone of Mexico and the Caribbean side of Tulum and into the Yucatan. You're going to see objects down there. I've had several sightings down there, including one with one of Greer's investigative teams in the volcano zone. But we're not going to have a true disclosure moment or shift until the visitors really come forward. I mean, I think you can put all the evidence and testimony, video, et cetera, on the table, and people are still going to go, show me more. I don't know what it's going to take.
I don't know either, and it's funny you say that. I grew up in South Texas on the Mexico border, and any potential sightings that I've had, obviously nothing completely substantiated, but very interesting things in the sky. I'll put it that way. The activity down there, I think, was very interesting to say the least. And my brother had an encounter, actually on South Padre Island
I
with a
remember that.
with a craft over the water. We interviewed him on our podcast about it, and obviously he's someone I trust. I trust him potentially more than anybody in the world, being a close family member and my best friend. And his story is very, very intriguing and very interesting, and something in fact, he and a friend went to go walk on the beach that night and asked me if I wanted to go with, and it was about 11:30, and I said, "No, I'm just going to go to bed." And then that walk on the beach is when they saw it, and I still kick myself for why didn't I go on that stupid walk? I should have went with him, because very interesting, intriguing story about the craft he saw. So
Yeah, well, when my book came out, I discovered if people would that I haven't communicated with in years kind of came out of the woodwork and go, "Oh, I got to tell you about my UFO story."
yeah,
Invariably, when you meet strangers or friends, somebody will have a UFO story in their back pocket or an abduction tale or whatever. I mean, it's widespread. Will we ever get to the point of understanding what it's all about? I don't know. I mean, I gotta head out of here pretty quickly, but I mean, this is one of my favorite quotes from the Space Pen Club, and this is kind of where I like to leave things because I think it really sums up the big picture, known and unknown. It was said almost 100 years ago by J.B.S. Haldane, a British geneticist and evolutionary biologist. He said the universe is not only stranger than we suppose, but it's stranger than we can suppose. And I think that is exactly right on. So that's where I fold up my tent and go home.
Well, Martin, we appreciate you taking the time to sit on our humble podcast and talk with us.
Yeah, and if you want to buy the book, the best way is to go to Amazon and just buy it there.
Perfect.
You can also go to the book's website, thespacepenclub.com, and there's a link to Amazon on there, and then there's some good background information and some really terrific reviews and endorsements of the book, including one from Dan Aykroyd, who's been into this subject as long as all of us put together. I was very lucky to get that, and check it out.
We'll do
I
that for sure.
I can tell you I will be ordering my copy this evening. And before you head out, I want to give you a sincere thank you, not just because that's what podcast hosts are supposed to do for their guests, thanks for coming, but sincere thank you for being here this night and sharing your story. It's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate it greatly.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and keep up the good work and watch the skies.
Yeah, always. All right. Mr. Martin Keller, everybody, thank you once again, sir.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
All right, you
Yeah,
too.
you too. Thank you.
All right, Chad. Very interesting conversation with Mr. Martin Keller this evening.
How stinking fun was that?
It's a good time.
That was
Definitely
awesome.
out of the wheelhouse of our normal podcast, but that's what we're trying to transition to, right? We're trying to get into those kind of out there subjects and really just embrace the what in the world name.
Well, and I have a couple other guests lined up as well.
Let them hear it.
I-
Shoot,
I've
let them
been
hear it. Let
trying
me
to-
hear it. I don't even know.
Yeah, I've got a guy that I think his book is Selling Dead People's Stuff or something like that. He's an antique guy, and I'm not exactly sure. I found this platform to where basically podcasts, people who want to be on podcasts, it's like podcastguest.com or something like that. I found it on Facebook. But it's been a really great platform so far. In fact, that other gentleman I emailed, he was like, "Shoot, do you guys have somebody lined up for tonight?" I'm like, "Yeah, actually
Yeah.
we do." But yeah, we'll have some other guests on. And man, when he started talking about Stephen Greer and the fact that he's worked with Stephen Greer, I'm like, golly, this guy, he's been at it a long time, and he definitely knows what he's talking about. And there's so much smut on the Travis Walton story. So many people have tried to debunk that. I was really afraid he was going to be like, yeah, the Travis Walton story just doesn't hold up to the test of time for me. And I was going to be like, dang it, man, that's my favorite one. That's the one that I point to all the time.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that was awesome, man.
That's cool. He did
I
talk about
hope.
my favorite UFO story is, well, kinda is the Minot and a Maelstrom one, but yeah, he didn't get into too much on it. But yeah, the same kind of thing happened at the base in Russia where they actually started launching the missiles and then shut it all down, and the Russians were freaking out because they're like, "Oh fuck, we're about to get blamed for a nuclear war."
Yeah, well, there's been a few encounters to where, and I think it was the one in Montana he was talking
Maelstrom.
about where they had the encounter with the craft and it shut down all of their nuclear codes. So even if they wanted to be able to launch a nuclear weapon, they wouldn't have been able to because all of their systems were locked up.
Yeah.
Which is an egregious act of war.
Which is why the aliens are scared that we're gonna nuke them into oblivion in space.
Yeah, and again, I don't know what their motive is. If it's a humanitarian aspect, like I said before, if they've been watching the monkeys on the rock and now they're like, oh crap, they're about to destroy themselves if we don't get involved in this, or if it's some sort of impact we would cause to their realm of existence. I don't know what it is.
I think maybe it could be that they're actually looking out for their little experiment down here, or maybe they foresee us finally setting our differences aside, like you see in all the alien movies where the world comes together and acts as one fucking population to repel a perceived threat from space. Or maybe they're scared that we do what we did in Avatar, which that movie's trash, by the way. But maybe they're scared we just eventually get to the point where we can travel the cosmos and just start nuking alien planets into oblivion.
I heard a theory, and I've been listening to so much this week and leading up because I wanted to make sure I had all my questions for Martin, all my ducks in a row. And I'll probably think of one as soon as we get done and be like, oh no, why didn't I ask him about that? But it was a theory in the sense of maybe the true progress of a society comes when a civilization, a humanity as one, can progress forward together. Because if you think about what we think as progression right now, especially in like the technological sense, it's okay, what's the newest iPhone? What's the latest technology? I got to have the nicest car, or I got to be better than this guy, or it's a lot of competition in the sense of I need to get a one up on this person, or my company has to be better than this company by having the newest, latest, and greatest. What if our true progression as humanity comes when we put all of that aside and truly look out for one another and truly progress as a one being and a one entity instead of fucking launching nukes into an ocean as an act of, flexing your muscles when Ukraine is being invaded by all that petty bullshit.
Yeah.
What
That'll
if
be the day that utopia is achieved.
what if there's truly another being out there that's like, wait a minute, these guys are out for themselves? Like, this civilization, like, these little monkeys on this rock are just out there throwing shit at each other and just trying to be the strongest ape on the planet? Like, what are they doing down there? We got to help them out a little bit. I don't know. I
Apes
don't know what
together
it is,
strong.
but it's like we say all the time, just be good to people. Just, we have a sign on our wall in our house that says work hard and be nice to people, and I think more of that would go a long way.
It's true. True indeed. True and real. All right, Chet. Well, with that, I think we're going to call it a night because I'm mad hungry. Next week, we are normal, just the both of us.
Yes.
Just the two of us. And the week after.
Next week, let's see. Hold on. Let me look at my calendar.
Pull up the calendar here.
So today's the 19th.
Next week is the 26th. The week after that, the 5th, is when our next one's on, right?
Yes, the 5th is when we have the
dude that sells dead people stuff.
Yes, that is Dwayne Cerny.
Okay.
His book is Selling Dead People's Things. And potentially next week, I'm not sure what Scott Graham Stevens is another gentleman that I'm lining up right now. He has spent 261 days in silent meditation. He has 15 books published, 1,600 days spent sleeping outside, 11 Tough Mudder competitions.
Damn, so dude kind of a badass.
Ordained minister. He's a college instructor, licensed substance abuse counselor, rostered psychotherapist. Yeah, he's got quite the list of accolades. So I might be able to line him up for next week, but I'm gonna keep on looking for guests, and
goddamn that.
Maybe someday we'll be able to have Martin back on again if things progress more. So we're just gonna keep on keeping on, brother.
Keep on keeping on. All right, y'all. You guys have a good night and a great week, and we will see you next week. If you're off tomorrow, enjoy it. I'm off tomorrow. I'm going to play golf, my first round of the season.
Good for you.
And yeah, but with that, as always, tell somebody you love them.
Make sure you tell somebody you love them, and keep your eyes on the skies, friends.
See you guys. Love you.
Love you guys.